In the last decade doing development finance and property finance, we've helped hundreds of clients, and these are the common mistakes that they miss when calculating their development costs. We'll start from the very beginning. So first, you've got the acquisition costs. These are simple things like the purchase price of the land. Make sure you can get this as cheap as possible because every little penny helps. Then you've got the stamp duty land tax, the SDLT. This tax varies depending on the property size and property type, but just make sure that it's worked out in advance. Then you've got the legal fees. This is something that a lot of our clients don't even think about and something they often underestimate the actual cost of. Typically, in development finance, you have to pay for the lender's legal fees as well as your own. On the smaller deals, this can range from £1,000 to around £3,000, but as you get larger, sort of to £1 million plus, that can be several thousand more than that. So it's always best to get a quote, and most of the lenders on their offer will actually tell you roughly what the legal fees are estimated to be. Then before you actually buy the plot, you've got the survey fees and your due diligence fees. These are costs that you should be doing that are things like environmental searches, environmental checks, topical surveys, structural surveys if it's an existing building. All of these can come at quite a cost. So make sure you get these quoted and get a few quotes for each of them. Then we'll move on to actually building the building itself. You've got the development costs, the obvious things like building and construction costs. You can work out roughly per square foot what these costs will be. Typically, that ranges from about £150 to £200 now. It used to be £100 and it's gone up quite a lot. This depends on if it's a new build or refurbishment, so use those as a rough rule of thumb. Then you've got to make sure you build in your contractor's fees, so that's your labor costs. This can vary massively depending on where you are in the country, and again, I can't stress, get multiple quotes unless you know somebody who has used somebody before and they offer a good quality finish. Then there's the material cost. This can vary massively depending on the actual finish that you're going for. This is things like the concrete, the steel, the timbers, the fittings. Make sure that you budget conservatively for these, as these can creep up as you go. Then you've got the actual professional fees. This is one that most people severely underestimate. This includes things like architect's fees, quantity surveyor fees, project managers, valuation fees, and the aforementioned solicitor fees. They can really add up, and depending on the size of your build, it can eat into a huge chunk of your actual profits, up to sort of 10-15%. For example, quantity surveyors, you're looking at typically £1,000 to £2,000 for their initial visit on a really small project, so one ground up build. Then for every single drawdown, it can be another £1,000, so that just very quickly can add up. Then you've got your planning and regulatory costs. These costs, once again, like all of these, vary depending on the size of the deal, and the planning application fees can be anywhere from $200, I've seen over $3,000 plus, depending on the actual scope of the project you're looking to do. Then you've got the Section 106 agreements, the Community Infrastructure Levy, aka the SIL. These are massive costs in some cases, absolutely massive. We've seen in the tens and hundreds of thousands on some of the projects that we've reviewed. If you don't include these, it can be an absolute nightmare at the end. Then you got the building regulations approvals. These are costs, again, that most people don't overlook. If you've got a contractor, a lot of these can be dealt with for you because it will revolve around the health and safety, the fire safety certificates, etc. for the site, but it's something to obviously bear in mind. Then there's the bit that I'm involved in, which is the finance and interest payments. A lot of people have been used to the quite low rate environment that we've been in previous years, so the new higher rates are quite a shock when it comes to people actually finding out what a development loan costs. They are typically around about 1% a month, give or take a little bit either way, as the current base rate, or the Bank of England base rate, is 5% at the moment. That's roughly where you're looking. Interest rates can vary massively depending on your project. A rough rule of thumb, if you're working out, is somewhere between 1% and 1.25% per month. Each lender works out their interest slightly differently, so it depends on when you draw down the loan, etc. But you're looking at roughly 12 to 16% per annum. Annualized, that works out a little bit less typically. You've got to look out for arrangement fees and exit fees. Typically, arrangement fees are 1 to 2%. On the smaller end, it's almost always 2%. Then you'll have an exit fee. Some lenders charge this, some don't, so it's just something to bear in mind. And an exit fee is just an additional fee that lenders add on when you pay back the loan, and it's typically 1 month's interest or there or thereabouts. This is just another way for them to increase their profits. An important thing when calculating your total cost or estimated cost for your project as well is to maybe build in a small buffer for finance overruns. These will be when your loan, typically a 12 months term for the bridging finance on the smaller end. If you go over that, you could fall into default situation where you end up paying more interest for a short period of time whilst you're trying to sell the property or refinance it. It's always worth having a small buffer built in, because most lenders will charge roughly 1% per month more than the contracted rate. So it could end up doubling your rate for a month or two, which is something that you've got to keep an eye out on. Now, moving on to some other costs that developers often miss, it's always worth building in a contingency budget that covers all the overruns, materials, costs, labor, anything, and the finance. This, generally a good rule of thumb, is anywhere between 5% and 15%. Then there's another thing that comes up, which are the utility connections. That's gas, electricity, water, sewage. These can be exceedingly expensive, especially in rural areas. So make sure that you get these checked out before you start. Talking of the site, you actually have to get all the materials, etc. onto the site. And if there's an existing building that needs to be removed, you've got to get that off the site. So make sure you include demolition costs, access costs. You might need to clear out some trees in order to get the heavy machinery onto the site. This all adds up. Then you've got the insurances. This can be extremely expensive depending on the size of the project. Developer insurance, public liability insurance, all risk policies, new build warranty, they can all be exceedingly expensive. So make sure you check out the cost. Get multiple quotes before you start. Then, as mentioned earlier with the professional fees, I thought I'd go into a little bit more detail of some of those because you might have some professional management costs. Having somebody like a project manager involved can save you money in the long run because they'll be keeping on top of things for you. And that is their whole role, but they don't come free. So you've got to make sure you include that. Then another professional you will get involved with if you're coming to the end of the project and you're looking to sell your property is estate agents. If you're using an estate agent, they typically charge somewhere between 1% and 2% of the sale figure. Then there's the exit strategy costs. These are the costs in selling the actual project off or refinancing it onto a buy-to-let. If you're refinancing, you'll need another valuation, solicitor fees. If you're going onto a buy-to-let, they're often taken care of within that, but it's something to bear in mind. And the marketing costs if you're doing this yourself or if you're using an agent. And then the big one, obviously, is the tax. This is a huge one. You've got your VAT, your capital gains tax, and with any tax advice, I would always speak to a qualified accountant before you start any project. Always add a contingency. Expect the unexpected with the builds. Review your cost schedule. Use software spreadsheets to keep a track of every cost. That way you can quickly realize if things are spiraling out of control. We've actually got a free checklist that you can use with some of the key costs that people often miss out. So as you're going through your budgeting, you can just tick those off one by one and make sure that you've done them. Hopefully this has helped. And if you know anyone that it might help, please share the video, and thanks for watching.